Hello viewers, is this a new low point for Gran Turismo 7? And this all relates to this week's Daily Race C, which you can see on my left. Now, on the face of it, it may well look like any other ordinary race, but I think it highlights a lack of creativity coming from Polyphony at the moment. Now, the first issue relates to the tyres. You can see their Comfort Softs are the tyres you have to use for this, which in itself is quite an interesting choice for a race car like this. But the main issue that causes is a distinct lack of force feedback after the recent update. So I can barely feel anything in my Fanatec steering wheel at the moment. Even if I put the settings all the way up to the maximum and change the force feedback on my wheel to 100, there is still even now a distinct lack of feeling in this car. Now if I jump into a time trial and put the racing hard tyres on, there's actually a lot more feeling in the wheel. Still not as much as I'd like, especially given it's on 100% everything. So I'm not sure if this new force feedback is completely related to the tyres, but it feels like it's certainly something that is being factored in here. So some weird feelings aside, one of the key issues I think with this race is the timing of it. Now Daily Race C normally takes place every half an hour, and it actually says there the time required is 25 minutes for this race. That is not strictly correct, because given that it's only a 7-lap race, this race actually lasts under 10 minutes. Which interestingly means that Daily Race B is the longer race this week. Okay guys, enough talk. Let's jump into a race. I've just set my fastest lap 13.4. Puts me on pole position for this one. Now we can highlight here that it is a 7-lap race. It's not going to be long. So hopefully I can hold my own at the front. There is no strategy to worry about other than not getting punted off and not spinning, which is quite easy to do in this car. But let's see how this plays out. Starting from the front, things should, theoretically, be quite easy. But that is not really going to be the case on a track like this, which includes a very big downhill braking zone. And then of course we're in a car that doesn't really have anything resembling brakes, given that it is a classic Formula 1 car. Over the jump, in towards the big braking zone of turn 1 then. Covering the inside line, going a little bit deep, which is going to put me on the back foot here into turn 2. Keeping the inside line though, against the player in second place. He's going to perform an old switcheroo, and once again we're going to be side by side down into the next hairpin. So a good little battle here, a little bit on the back foot, just having to defend and preserve the position. Even though it is a very short race, and this track does have quite a lot of corners, it's not the easiest track to overtake on, funnily enough. And therefore once the race settles down into position, as it kind of has done now, as long as you don't make too many mistakes, it's actually somewhat easy to stay in your position, as long as you obviously don't make any glaring mistakes. Which, to be honest, in this car is quite easy to do. It's not the easiest car to drive. Turning traction control on may well help you. I am driving on 0 TC here. After the first lap, pulling out a 1.4 second margin to the cars behind, and therefore a nice safe gap, from which I probably won't get dive bombed. And that is always a lovely scenario to be in. But anyway, this race didn't really provide too much drama. It was more a case of me versus the car, just trying to keep the thing under control. As you can see through here, having a bit of a moment. So that was the biggest challenge I would say in this race, not perhaps the racing, but more the driving aspect of it. So ultimately, after 7 laps, coming through to take a convincing win. Alright, I mean, that was a quite convincing win. Consistent, didn't lose the lead. It was actually quite a nice little challenge, if I'm being completely honest. But the race itself really died down quite quickly. There wasn't actually really any overtaking. There wasn't much fighting behind me. And that's a rare pole position, faster lap, clean race, and victory in the same race. So that doesn't really happen too much for me. And just got awarded 257,000 credits for that, because we do have the 600% increase on the prize for this race. But let's see if it could be a bit more exciting. Let's start towards the back. And I suppose the frustrating thing now is that I have to wait another 18 minutes for the next race, which is kind of dumb. And the race seems to take about 10 or 11 minutes total, meaning you just about miss out on being able to enter Daily Race B. And I suppose whilst we're on the topic of the increased payout, as you can see on the top right, 600% increase. And you could argue this highlights another issue, which is that the payouts online are in general way too low as they are. I just got $250,000 for that race. I think that's what you should probably get normally. Okay guys, let's go again, this time from the back of the pack, 11th on the grid on the Alex Albon account. Now, of course, there's no strategy for this race, as I said in the in the first race because it's just one set of tyres. You don't need to pit. There's no requirement for 2 sets of tyres. And therefore, it's really just about just trying to pummel your way through the grid and just kind of waiting for mistakes from others. So that's the strategy. Let's see if it pays off. Okay, let's jump into this race. Number 2. Now, you're probably thinking, Super GT, look, your title and the way you're phrasing this is probably a bit harsh. You know, there's still some fun to be had with this race, and I definitely agree. But I think as an accumulation over time of lots of quite dull and, let's say, rather uncreative daily races, this one really sort of took it to another level as that guy jumps in for a nice big dive bomb over the curb. Now I'm going to return the favour here down into the next hairpin, but it's not going to end well for me, unfortunately, at the next corner, as we're just going to kind of get unceremoniously bundled into the wall. But there you go. So not exactly the cleanest race here, starting from the back. But yeah, Daily Race C here is just an accumulation of lots of bad decisions, I would say. Only 7 minutes. And then the fact that you can't jump into Daily Race B. The race itself isn't very interesting. There's no strategy involved. The race length is too short. Cars are lacking in force feedback and feeling. There is no tyre strategy. There's no options for anything to differentiate yourself in the race by going for a different tyre strategy or something like that. There's so many factors here that are at play. This guy, oops, sorry, spinning out and blocking the track, although he's ghosted. So he doesn't actually need to say sorry because I went straight through him. No problems there. Looking up the inside of Lil Alahol. Is it quite going to work here through the awkwardly banked corner, which is actually one of the hardest corners on this track, I would say, to get right. It seems to have a weird gravitational force on it as we head up the hill. Now, if we compare this race to some Daily Race C's of late, I mean, this race doesn't feel like a Daily Race C, it feels like a Daily Race A. Nothing wrong with Daily Race A. Oftentimes, Daily Race A isn't particularly serious as, well, kind of like that overtake attempt there, as we get bundled into the wall. And yeah, Daily Race C could definitely do with, I mean, a return to sort of longer races with some strategy. I think that's something that would be great to see. That guy actually lets me go back through, so no hard feelings there. And I just want to know what you guys think about this race. I think it is okay fundamentally. It's not, you know, the worst thing in the world. There are worse things in the world right now, but I think it does highlight for me a distinct lack of creativity from Polyphony. It is almost like a robot is selecting these races rather than someone putting a lot of time in to really think about it. But that is just my thought. This race wasn't as good, eventually going through at the end to finish in a rather disappointing and lowly 8th position. So not the ideal race there, guys. Only got to 8th. Lots of fighting, lots of carnage. But it really does feel like a Daily Race A because there's only, well, 11 people finished this race. So it really feels quite empty. It very much feels very unserious, I would say. Now, on a complete side note, I found this very funny clip on Twitter from Max Power going into turn 1 here. And it's our favourite villain, GT Arc. He's the modern day Momos. You see, goes in for the kill there, doesn't quite get it. So if you ride on board with Arc here at the start of the race, from his point of view, you see that immediately punting off his fellow Italian driver there, unceremoniously. And then heading down towards turn number 1, big braking zone on this track. You should be able to get the punt right if you want to do it. Shameful attempt, it must be said, and boom, straight into the wall. Only ends up spinning himself out. There's literally infinite ways that they can improve this race. And if you watched my previous video, you would have seen that I set up a Group 4 race, which was about 10 laps long. It required hard tyres and medium tyres to be used. It was in Group 4. And you know what? It turned out to be a brilliant race. And it didn't take me too much thought to put this race together. Ultimately, there's bigger things to worry about in the world than what Daily Race C is like on GT7. But I'd actually say this week's best race is that of Daily Race B, the Group 3 race at Suzuka, 5 laps, so a longer race. Allow me to show you some examples. Yes, we're going to jump into this first one, starting in the BMW. And this is a 5-lap race. 16 players, which is actually more than Daily Race C, which is very strange. Daily Race C only featuring 12 players, which makes it feel very, very empty indeed. This one, 16 players, it feels like much more of a race. I would say that more of the better players are gravitating towards this one. As you can probably tell by the closeness of the grid, lots of the players here were sort of in the high 58s in qualifying or the low 59s. And yeah, it just seems like more of the Gran Turismo population. We're finding this race a lot more doable. That's the right way to put it. But anyway, through Spoon Corner, the guy in the Lamborghini ahead is going to continue turning left on the exit of the left-hander and find himself up against the wall. With now a Porsche for very close company behind, it seems like there is no rest at all in this race. It's quite an intense one, carrying a lot of speed. Through 130R, the Porsche behind actually goes wide. Mario Sonic here seems like he's dawdling a little bit going into this corner, so I looked for the move. Didn't quite pay off, but that is a decent opening lap, moving from 11th up to 9th. Let's fast forward it to turn 1, and with the new physics in the game, it is actually incredibly easy to understeer wide and make a mistake through that first corner, that first sequence from turn 1 into turn 2, as you're kind of braking and turning at the same time, which is increasingly a difficult art in this game after that update in 1.49. So having to really modulate the way that you brake and steer at the same time through a lot of the corners now, and I think it's one of the reasons why the Huracan is actually doing quite well this week, given that its ability to rotate is rather good. Anyway, the Nissan GTR up in front, getting a little bit loose, a little bit wide onto the gravel, losing momentum and a couple of positions, so that in turn means I've moved up into 7th. This was a good race so far. In the BMW M6, it feels a little bit clunky and big as it is, but it definitely is one of the better cars for this race. As the Lamborghini goes for a slide through turn 1 and 2, we kind of spoke about that just a moment ago. It's very easy to do that, especially in that car, which does seem to rotate quite nicely and sometimes too nicely. As we're going to try and follow this guy now, Mario Sonic. Not easy to get the move done through the S's here at Suzuka, and therefore we're trying to square him up and go for an attempt in the second half of the lap, which is really where you're going to get the moves done on this circuit. So through 130R, it's really a case of just carrying as much speed as possible, dipping 2 wheels on the grass if you can on the inside, and not doing this on the exit, as Mario Sonic goes for a nice little trip into the wall. And therefore, moving up into 6th place, it's been one of those races where it's almost like I haven't really done an actual overtake. I've just benefited, should I say, from other people's mistakes and misery. In towards the final chicane at the end of the final lap, lap 5 of 5, closing out a 10-minute race, a couple of minutes longer than Daily Race C, which is incredibly rare. I don't think that really ever happens. Finishing in a solid 6th place in a decently stacked grid, moving us then to the second attempt at this race. Still starting 10th, despite having a top, let's say, 300 in the world sort of time. Might be a bit lower by now, but just shows you how competitive this race was, as the car in front goes a little bit wide on the run through turn 1 and 2, and I'm going to quite quickly take that position. If there's any positions going for free, I'll quite gladly take them. So this time, driving the Lamborghini Huracan, and as I've said just before, this car is good for this race. It rotates very well, and it can be quite difficult to master this car. It's always been like this since the GT Sport days even. It does rotate in a weird way, which has to be tamed and has to be used appropriately, but it isn't quite easy to do that. Anyway, through Degner 1, through Degner 2, trying to carry as much speed through here, giving ourselves maybe a shot into the hairpin. Not quite close enough here, although cars in front quite close. They're going to concertina up. The Nissan GTR goes into the back of the Lambo in front and goes a little bit wide, so we can gain a position there. Moving up into 8th. Once again, in similar fashion to the previous race, it's a case of just capitalising on the mistakes of others. Sometimes you don't necessarily have to really force the issue. Sometimes you just have to wait for others to force the issue upon themselves. and to drive wide, just like this, as the exit of Spoon is a very crucial part of the circuit as it leads out onto this back straight. As the Lamborghini in front, just trying to push a little bit too hard and gain too much time there, and just runs a little bit wide. Up the inside into 130R can be quite a difficult position to be in. You have to really carry the speed a lot less than you normally would to make sure you don't run wide on the exit. We've done the job quite nicely. Moving now up into 7th, so 3 positions on 1 lap. Car in front has a penalty. Cost us a couple of positions in front, having a bit of a moment through turn. I don't know what turn that is. It's the final corner. Don't know the number. And then he's going to eventually turn left into turn 2, which is the wrong direction. And that's me up now into 6th place. So once again, it's a race of just minimising those mistakes, which I must be honest, are so easy to make now under the new set of physics, which seem to be a lot more tricky, I would say, when you're really pushing the car at least. When you're driving it on the limit, very easy to lose control. I've certainly been losing control of the car a lot more often recently than I have pre-update, should we say. Almost a moment there. I mean, I do lose a bit of time, a couple of tenths at least, running a little bit wide on the exit of Degner 1, and it messed up my entry for Degner 2. Lamborghini behind, very close, not quite able to go for the move here, as we're going to get a poor bit of traction on the exit. I think there might have been a bit of contact, and the unfortunate thing here is that I was trying to keep close to the Porsche in front so that I'd be close enough to capitalise on the penalty which is about to serve. However, that mistake has cost about a second, and therefore going to be too far away, I would presume, when the penalty comes up in just a few seconds' time. There it is. We are definitely going to close up though. Let's see how this plays out as we head towards 130R. Definitely closing the gap, but not enough to get the overtake done. I think if I didn't lose that time on the exit of the hairpin, I think that would have been a done deal. Closing up on the braking in the braking zone towards the chicane. A little bit later on in the race, going through Dunlop again, just waiting for the mistakes, and lots of people were doing this actually, running a little bit wider. I almost did it myself. You can see there are 2 wheels on the grass, but for the Porsche, 4 wheels in the gravel, and that is not the correct line. We're going to move up into 5th, and now it's going to turn into something of a more defensive race, given that Costas behind is very quick. This guy went wide at turn 2, turned left at turn 2 in fact, a few laps ago, and started quite far in front of me, and therefore we know his pace. My defence didn't last long, as you can see, just running a little bit awkwardly wide on the second part of Spoon, which is such an easy corner to get wrong, and it is probably my weakest corner of the entire track. Now luckily my pace was just about okay, enough to get in front of Levicius here, who had made a mistake / got a penalty, and it just shows you that even when you're in kind of no man's land and there's not really seemingly any overtakes to go for, just still try to maintain a decent level of pace, because you never know what's going to happen to the cars in front. They may well succumb to a mistake or a penalty, giving you a chance. Ultimately here, finishing in a solid P5 in a very cool Daily Race B. Much better than Daily Race A, I would say. Let me know your thoughts on both, and I shall see you next time. Goodbye.